My name is Dr. Rachel Goldlust, and I am the Sustainability Researcher here at Renew, having done my doctorate on off-grid living in history with a focus on alternative lifestylers. I'm very excited to be hosting this session today on creating sustainable housing, eco-communities and co-housing. I'm speaking to you from Dja Dja Wurrung land in central Victoria, and it would be great if you could let me know which Aboriginal land you are joining from and pop it in the chat. Thanks to our sponsors and council partners who've made this day possible, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, NatHERS, Your Home, Bank Australia, Sonnen, HIP v Hype, Design Matters National, and Lighthouse Architecture and Science. Before we get started, I'll give a brief overview of the homeowners and panelists who will be joining us. All of them have provided house profiles that can be viewed on our website with photos, house tour videos, and detailed sustainability credentials. You can even continue the conversation and make further inquiries in the comments section. We encourage you to have a look, and we have shared the links in the chat. So first up, we have Jodie Passmore, owner of the Cubby House, which is part of Witchcliffe Ecovillage in Witchcliffe, WA. The Cubby House is a home designed to sit harmoniously with the environment, with its minimal footprint, rammed earth in every room, and highly functional spaces. Welcome, Jodie.
Hi.
We are also joined by Clint, Hare, General Manager at the Cape Ecovillage, located at the beautiful Cape Patterson in Victoria. Many homes from the Cape are featured in this year's Sustainable House Day, including Coast at the Cape, an accessible single-storey home that is wheelchair-friendly and suitable for a growing family. Hi, Clint. And finally, we're joined by Jo Thierfelder, also from Witchcliffe Ecovillage. Jo is passionate about eco-communities and sustainable living, and we welcome her to this panel. Hi, Jo. So I'm going to start with you, Jodie. Now, you work and live at Witchcliffe Ecovillage, and what is the first thing that you think people should know about life in an eco-village, and why should people consider it an option for them?
Oh, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I've been to so many Sustainable House Days as a punter, and people have been so generous with me. So it feels really great to be here. Thank you. On Radandi Bibbulmun country. The first thing I think that people should know is that you own your own block. You can build on your block as you please, and you can do as you please. I think my sister's first response was, do you own a share in this? And that's not how this eco-village is structured. So that's probably my first thing. And then, for us, it's been a really phenomenal kind of change of lifestyle. We looked at a number of different eco-villages, and I think they all do so many great things in different areas. And as it turned out, my partner and I grew up in Perth, so COVID really was a time we were honing our values, and Western Australia was calling us back. And Witchcliffe Ecovillage has been really great for our little family because, yesterday there was 6 kids in my kids' room, all kind of, for an hour doing their thing. And then the next hour was someone else's turn, and my partner and I got to clean out the garage. And those things for us, when we were looking at a block that would have its own garden, its own, rainwater collection, everything. We would have been doing it all ourselves, and everything, fire breaks, management, all of that, we would have been doing it all ourselves. And we got so close, and I'm just so glad that we found this first, because we would like to grow our own vegetables and do, but we can't do everything. And so doing things alongside other people who are at that stage of their life is been pretty great.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll have some more time to talk a little bit more about Witchcliffe in a second. I just want to go to Clint and ask if you could give us a little bit of a description about life at the Cape, maybe just some of the physical dimensions to give people a sense of what it is, and talk a little bit about its sort of sustainability credentials.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Rachel. I want to say a big thank you to Renew, first of all, just for putting on Sustainable House Day yet again. Renew's been a tremendous resource for the Cape for a long while, not just with Sanctuary and Renew Mag, but with their independent advice. So we're very grateful for everything that Renew does, and just want to say a big thanks. A little bit about the Cape. So we are an eco-village located about 2 hours southeast of Melbourne, if you haven't heard of us. We've been going for quite a few years now, and we're in our final stage. We sit on about 100 acres, and more than 50% of that land is for open space. So we've got kilometres of walking tracks, we've got countless wetlands, we've got a sports precinct, a huge community farm, and 230 homes that sit in amongst that. In terms of life at the Cape, it's a really good question because people often ask about the difference between living in a sustainable home at an eco-village versus living in a sustainable home elsewhere. And we get a lot of, credit or attention for the sustainability credentials of our houses, and less so for the community that's created down there and the social sustainability features. And so that's really heartening to see become galvanised over the last few years. And I think it's quite surprising often for folks who do move down or visit that they're taken aback by how well planned the estate is, and how things like the walking tracks or pocket parks located throughout the estate, and the walking tracks that take you down to the beach or to the community areas that are on everyone's front doorstep or back doorstep, kind of creates that sense of community. There's things, right down to folks, the community getting together to recycle, use old wooden offcuts from the building sites, untreated, of course, to make things like birdhouses or microbat housing or worm farms, and getting together to do these types of things. Different features that we've got down there, like the community farm, has been a real springboard for urban agriculture, and really understanding and finding a deeper understanding of food security. So we've got a real food sharing culture that's established there amongst a really big cohort of our residents. I think some time back, about 60 of the 75 or 80 households were members of the community farm organisation down there, a big over 1 acre, huge community farm with some buildings that are coming up. So I suppose the big difference there is that it's probably the sustainability is featured throughout the community, in addition to the sustainable housing, which we have a minimum of 7.5 stars, but we're averaging over 8 stars, and solar and a lot of other great things there. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I might just ask another quick question on that. You talked about the social sustainability, but what was the kind of design inspiration? Like, did you take inspiration from other places in the design of the Cape?
Well, very much so. Look, I think every eco-village, I think, stands on the shoulders of ones before them. Beyond Today and various other ones around Australia, we took a lot of inspiration from. We also worked very closely with a lot of experts in the field of social and environmental sustainability in the early days to get the planning right. I think folks who have tried to build a sustainable house in, let's say, an area where your roads are orientated on 45 degrees to north, smaller blocks, you're really setting yourself up for failure. Or the developers at that time were setting themselves up for failure, which is a shame. So getting everything as close to right as possible in the beginning is really important, but also probably giving yourself the freedom to iterate on that design as new technology or new ideas come into practice. And case in point, with our community farm, which I talked about, which is we're pretty thrilled with, I think we're on revision 22 by the time that the drawing was finished. And that was after probably years of visiting community farms around Australia and consulting with members of community farms and people who have run those farms about what works well and what doesn't, because we wanted to learn as many of their mistakes as possible before we dived in.
Awesome. Thank you. I might turn to you now, Jo. Hi.
Hi.
Can you talk a little bit about how and why Witchcliffe started in the same sort of context, and also maybe how some of those interested in starting or even joining an Ecovillage might move forward?
Sure. Thank you again for having me. And I can probably reiterate everything that Clint just said about sustainable living in communities and so forth. For the Witchcliffe Ecovillage, I guess we started a long time ago in terms of planning. So what Clint said around making sure you get all the groundwork done is very important. I think we've been running now for about 13 plus years to get all of the planning in place before we even started. We started selling our first lots in 2020, right when COVID hit. That was interesting. So we are basically very much about affordability, community, and sustainability. And that sustainability, again, like Clint touched on, is around social, environmental, and economic. So for us, we've really tried to focus on all three of those, sort of triple bottom line. The community, though, has got to be the most important reason why all of the people that are moving here. There's almost like a sense of we tick all the environmental boxes, and that's almost like expected from an eco-village, but it's that sense of community that people are really joining us for. And I guess all of our thinking around design and how all of the spaces work together, how all of the streets are laid out. We've got our residential, we call them our residential clusters, and all of the houses are clustered around these community gardens in the middle, and the entire physical landscape is designed to help people come together and support that food growing culture and support people knowing their neighbours. In fact, it's funny, COVID actually really ended up playing into our hands in a certain way, because what came from that was people wanted to know their neighbours. They wanted to simplify their life. They wanted to get out of the cities. They wanted to grow their own food. They wanted to have that sense of support that comes from communities. And I think that's what you get from an eco-village, beyond a sustainable home and beyond the conservation areas. And of course you capture your own water, and yes, you make your own energy from your solar and all of those things, but it's that sense of coming together as people that's really, and that support that you get from your neighbours, that's really what drives a lot of people to come to an eco-village, I think.
I think so too. We've been a bit focused here on eco-villages, obviously, because that's where you all come from, or that's the kind of living arrangements that you're in. But I'm wondering if anyone would like to talk about maybe a comparison to other types of residential developments, such as co-living or co-housing. I know that might not be your specialty, but just to give people a sense of the difference so that they can understand what an eco-village is compared to other types of alternative living arrangements.
I could probably make a comment about that. There's a little co-housing development in Denmark, which is a bit further south from us, called Deco Housing. I haven't actually been there myself, but we've had a little bit to do with them at the Ecovillage. They are, collaborative living. They share what is common around co-housing, which is a common house. So they have a place where they each of the residents has their own home, but they have a much more closer living quarters, and they share a common house where they come together for meals, shared laundry perhaps, some shared facilities and amenities. Now at the Ecovillage we do things a little differently. We do have shared spaces, definitely, in terms of we have a little community meeting house within our clusters, and our clusters fit about, say, between 19 to 25 homes around these community gardens. So we have those shared spaces in the middle, but each of our lots are strata titled lots, and they are completely private. So it's a little different to co-housing in that way. But we do have one other area on in our development, which is our aged and dependent care site, and we've got a company called Cooperation Housing that is developing a co-housing over 55s and affordable living co-housing development within that, and that has all of those things I mentioned around a large common house where they will come together. So the units themselves are rather small. So the idea being with co-housing is you can have a much smaller dwelling that you live in, but then you have those other shared facilities that you can go and use, and then you come together often for meals, for cooking. They'll have a little guest suite for people to come and stay, and that sort of thing. So we've got almost like a little tiny micro co-housing community that will be developed within the Ecovillage. So, yeah.
That sounds like a really great model, especially considering that older demographic is
That's right, yeah.
that a lot of people are thinking about now. Jodie or Clint, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, there was just one thing I wanted to add. In our Ecovillage, we buy our block that we own to build on. It's a survey strata block. And then each lot has an allotted, what we call an EUA, exclusive use area for growing fruit and vegetables, and that is strata owned. So on, yesterday, everyone was out in their EUAs, and a couple of our neighbours are kind of doing little rabbit-proof fencing where they don't need to put the fence in the middle of their two gardens, because they're often out there, doing their gardening at the same time. And we personally really love that structure because the kids are all in everyone's gardens, and then our block, when our family comes down or whatever, is ours. But yeah, we looked at a lot of other places, and I think, having that shared and communal space was really appealing for us, because I think, that's what sustainability has to become about. We're all in this together, and the only way we're going to be able to make it work is by helping each other.
I feel like that for me personally, I'm also going to be building at the Ecovillage as well myself. For me, it feels like it strikes the right balance between that private ownership, and you can have that sense of this is your home and you can hunker down and have that private space when you need it, but also that community is right there on your doorstep. So whenever you do want to engage and you want to have that social interaction, that it's there, and you've got that, as Jodie mentioned before, all of those incredible benefits that you get from being able to share so many more resources than you would otherwise be able to manage on your own. So to me, it feels like it strikes the balance right, and I think that's probably why we're getting such good traction with mainstream. The mainstream essentially is because people can see that they get a lot more bang for their buck in terms of having their own private home, but then you get all of these other incredible community resources that come along with it.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Clint?
I think Joe and Jodie did a great job of summarising the differences between co-housing and eco-villages. At the Cape, we have found what we think is a good balance, where people own their own houses and they own their land. And there's a huge amount of common space with all sorts of amenity and infrastructure. And then, from dog parks to, like we say, sports areas or wetlands or lookout points. For example, we make sure that all the highest points with the best views over the ocean are common areas, so everybody can be there. View sharing arrangement. But then we're over to the farm. There's some folks in the community that are less keen on urban farming. They might do a little bit in their house, but they don't necessarily want to be involved with that community farm. And so there's finding that balance. Everybody gets to put their hand up and decide how much they want to be involved at any point in time, or in the entirety of the project. And they always have that house that is theirs, and they can decide how much they want to share their other community facilities.
Staying with you, Clint, do you think that's one of the reasons why the Cape has been so successful, or can you speak to any of the other reasons?
Yeah, look, I think that is definitely part of the reason. I think folks often do want to have their own house and have a large degree or complete control of that, with the exception of some basic requirements for sustainability. And be involved in the community, have that option to be as involved as they'd like to be. I think eco-villages naturally draw people who are environmentally and socially minded, so they want to be in and around common-minded folks. and finding that balance between, like I said, I talked about Beyond Tomorrow before, but other eco-villages, and getting feedback what has worked well and what they could do better if they were to start the project again. And, you know, Witchcliffe and Cubby House, it sounds like there's a lot of similarities between what the Cape has done there. We're giving people that freedom and not being overly prescriptive in the opinion of some of our residents. So it's good.
Mm. I mean, I was going to ask that question to you later on, but I might ask Jodie, what could you speak to a bit about the demographics of people who might be like yourself or might be a bit different, who are attracted to eco-village life?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I first met with Mike and Michelle, who are the co-founders of the project, they said it's our hope that in each of the clusters that there's diversity. And, you know, there's 3 different lot types in each of the clusters. There's what is called a groupie, and you can't have more than 3 people living in houses built on those blocks. They're the affordable housing blocks. Then there's the middle-sized block, the cottage lot, which our family built on. And that was really to enable us to have more money to afford the build. And then there's the family-sized lots, which are based on the quarter-acre block. And I remember early days, because I think we followed the project for 5 or 6 years before we bought our block. Yeah, Mike and Michelle saying that, and it has actually eventuated exactly like that. You know, our son plays chess with the chap in his 80s around the corner. We take him to medical appointments. He espaliers my fruit trees, which I'm so grateful about because I have no skills in that area whatsoever. Yeah, there's a couple of retirees, there's a couple of other young families, a couple of single working people, yeah, who I can always rely on for a Friday night and escape from the kids. Yeah, and so it's interesting. I think that block size has really enabled that diversity. And of course, you know, we're not just in our clusters. The WhatsApp group of the parents is probably the most, you know, immediate form of communication in my circle. And there's lots of people living in different clusters that we're always, yeah, with and around. So I think it has worked that way.
Mm. I mean, there's a few that haven't worked that way. So I'm interested, what about the experience at the Cape?
Look, we've kind of lent on different block sizes as well. I think that's really helped draw in a broader demographic. I think we adjusted our lot sizes in the early days because we recognised that the demand from different folks, and that can be older single folks down to first home buyers. And fortunately, we have a really broad demographic. Definitely skews older, and there's a few reasons for that. But making sure that there's affordable house and land packages or affordable blocks. In our case, we sell the land, and working with our builders to make sure there's affordable, you know, build form there as well. So that's really helped. For most of the duration up until around now, and everybody's probably aware that the build costs have really gone through the roof in the last couple of years since COVID for a variety of reasons. And so we're working hard with our builders to try and bring down those build costs again. And that's, you know, we have controls about house size in place already. And our average house size is probably between 140 and 150 square metres of living space. And that's always going to make houses more affordable if they're not McMansions. But also looking into things like 3D printing using recycled content and biomass and other types of stuff, because you know, to start to shore up that new emerging technology and demonstrate the possibilities there. We haven't 3D printed anything on site yet, and the community building in the farmhouse, as we call it, in the urban farm, will probably be the first cabs off the rank there. But yeah, affordability is key to get the broad demographic, which we think is really healthy for vibrant communities. And we're just looking at the current challenge of build costs and seeing how we can continue that work.
I just probably got a little comment on affordability. Obviously, that's a really hot topic at the moment. It's certainly something that has become, as Clint mentioned, with the escalation of building prices lately, affordability is on everybody's lips. So I guess we're also in Margaret River region in southwest of WA, and we have a real affordability issue here in particular. So Jodie also mentioned we've got these little lots called groupie lots, which reference the grouped housing settlements that were the original pioneers in this region built. As a developer, we've actually kept them artificially low to try to enable them to be considered affordable housing. We've also set an income and an asset cap on those to ensure that they're not snapped up by, you know, lots of wealthy people to be used as holiday homes. That's not their intention. We've got 5 of those in each of our residential clusters, and they are essentially they're subsidised, I guess, by the developer. So we've kept them artificially low, and we've also, I guess, they're subsidised a little bit by some of the other lots in that area. And so given that income and asset cap, which is still relatively generous as it needs to be, because at the moment building any house, even a small one, has gotten a lot more expensive, probably in the order of about 30% price rise at least in the last 12 to 18 months with building. That's what we've seen here in WA anyway. And so it's becoming, it's still a really big challenge to be able to create that affordable housing. We've actually decided to split up some of the lots that we were going to do a little bigger to create some more of those sort of style groupie homes to try and help people get in. Because what we wanted right from the very outset of this project was to make sure that this was not some eco-exclusive eco-village, that it was a gated community that was only for the, eco-wealthy. That was definitely not what we wanted to be about. We wanted to make sure that our demographic was really mixed, not just in ages, but also socioeconomic as well, because I think that's a really, really important part of any community, is making sure that you've got that really good mix of people, because old people want to have kids around and kids want to learn from grandmas, and, that's really, really important. So we've got individuals that are first home buyers in their 20s, and we've got octogenarians plus building homes. So that is exactly what we were hoping for, and we're pretty thrilled actually that's come about. And as Clint said, it does skew a little bit to the older set, but our 2 biggest demographics are probably young families. So Jodie's age kind of couples with, and then the third biggest group is probably the kids of those 30s to 40s. So, and then the 50s to 60s. So we've really got quite a nice broad demographic, and definitely want to encourage people to feel like places like eco-villages don't necessarily have to be more expensive to live in, but what you do get out of it is an incredibly comfortable, efficient, sustainable home, which will reduce your living costs in the long run. And that's something that we all want, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Clint, my question would be to people, I've just sort of read some of the comments in the chat, and for people who are finding that price point a little high, would you have any suggestions for how people could go about setting up their own versions of, let's say, if it's a full eco-village or another kind of co-living arrangement? What would you suggest people do?
Are you talking to Clint or me, or who?
Either, whoever would like to answer, sorry.
I guess before we answer that question, I would say to do a costing of your household consumption and energy use for, the first couple of years, because that really surprised us by building efficiently and energy conscious. And I know this is the song we're all singing, but it was shocking. And to be in the 9-star, ours is 8.1, but to be in our friend's 9-star home with no heating, no cooling, no costs, $160 back on the last energy bill. These green loans that banks are starting to recognise that if it's really hard to say if you can come up with the capital at the start, it does have an impact on your living costs for the next few years, but it does. And that's all I can speak to.
No, that's a really good point. It's worth mentioning. Thank you. Clint, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I might just, if we're talking about eco-villages and bringing costs down, I think it's important to remember that a lot of new development sites before they are developed. That means, we start civil construction, start putting water and sewer pipes in the ground. They've often changed hands on average of around 3.5 times since they were, say, farmland. So that's 3.5 owners who have taken a clip, and which means there's less. They need to either charge a higher price to deliver the same infrastructure that is required to start a community or start any estate, or they look to minimise their profits, which doesn't usually happen. So the starting point, ideally, and it's much easier said than done, is to find the land and work through the process of rezoning. That carries a lot of risk, a lot of stress, but it allows more financial freedom for the team behind delivering any project to deliver a lot more for the residents, while still maintaining a profitable project, which is important too. After that, you've got past that step of delivering an eco-village, and at that marketing stage, I feel as though we can't understate how important training is for not only designers and architects, but builders. We went through a process over quite a long period working with 6 architects and designers, and a number of local builders to an iterative design process where the designers were challenged to design 2 7.5-star houses for different blocks that we picked out, and those designs were handed over to the builders. The builders went through a costing exercise and made recommendations on how they could reduce the cost or value manage that build. Went back to the designers, back and forth a few times, until we brought the cost right down. And that was, it was interesting because the dozen designs that came out of that process, I think it was 10 at the time, it's now 12, which are, by the way, freely available on our website and always have been. And that was a condition of being paid to do that work, to make sure that it was free for everybody to use. Almost none of those designs have been used at the Cape, and we're over 100 homes in, finished, and another quite a few dozen in the pipeline. A few of them have been slightly modified and used, but mostly we found that upskilling process allowed our designers to sit down with any new customer, talk about their budget, talk about their requirements, and they were so familiar that they could design a beautiful 7.5-star affordable home then and there. And I think those designers who have been working, designers and architects who've been working on the project since the inception, they can now, I say a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but they can design an 8-star house with their eyes closed and two arms tied behind their back, because they've done it so many times. And I think it costs just as much money to put a window in the right place as it does to put it in the wrong place. So if people really have that deep understanding, the builders and the people designing these homes, it's much, much easier to deliver an affordable home that ticks all the boxes for the occupants, size, functionality, whatever it is that they like. That's a pretty big point for me.
It's a good point. I mean, we don't think often about the double function of places like an eco-village offering that kind of training and services to the industry, and how are they going to get that kind of access to lots of versions of sustainable design unless they get to practice to be able to do it. So I hadn't thought about that aspect of what it's contributing to the broader sustainable house industry. I'm just going to look to some of the questions from the audience. And I wanted to start with a question from Jono, who asked about the predominant challenges associated with living in an eco-village. Does anyone want to speak to that?
Challenges. Well, I think Clint mentioned it earlier. There's a bit of a self-selection process that happens with an eco-village. We certainly haven't done any social engineering, but it is apparent to us that the people that are coming to us are already tuned in to the principles, I guess, the ethos of what we're all about. You probably wouldn't want to come and live in the Witchcliffe Eco-Village unless you were pretty keen on gardening, certainly interested in sustainability, wanting to know your neighbours, being a part of a community, interested in environmental issues, those sorts of things. I mean, that's fairly broad brushstroke answers, but I guess if you weren't interested in those things, then and occasionally I've had people who say, oh, what's this all about, and start talking to them, and they either get it or they don't get it. And if they don't get it, then this is probably not the place for them. So I guess the challenges might be a little bit that we do have a very active community. People might be worried perhaps about how much they are required, how much time or money or energy they're required to spend on community activities. We haven't set any requirements or minimums that people will need to do. So within the strata clusters that people live within, for example, the one that I'm in, we decided as a group to set up a quarterly busy bee. Essentially, if you're not interested in being a part of that sort of thing, then this kind of living is probably not the right style for you. I guess, to be honest with you, I can't really think of any other particular challenges. Clint or Jodie, maybe you can step in.
Yeah, I have a friend who lives in a flat in the city, in Leederville, and she tries to put her rubbish out without seeing a single soul. She doesn't want to see her neighbours, and you know, she comes to visit, and it's not somewhere I'd tell her to live. But
some people definitely need that, don't they? When they just want to be in their own little world and they don't want to know anybody, and that's perfectly fine. It's just don't come and live in an eco-village.
That's right. And then, you know, we had COVID 2 months after we moved in, and every day we open the door to homemade bread, pumpkin soup made from people's pumpkins. You know, for me, it's like 10 out of 10, but not for my friend. The other challenge, we had this wonderful creating community workshop with a phenomenal woman, Louise Duxbury, and she coined, and I forget where she quoted it from, but every group or relationship, you will have forming, storming, norming, performing. And the forming is the honeymoon period, everything's great. And the storming is having challenging conversations. You know, we share so many values with our neighbours and our friends, but we don't parent exactly the same way. So having that conversation about what we will and won't allow our children to do while in their care is a necessary conversation to becoming closer. I feel in my life ready to have those conversations, and I've really enjoyed that. And every time I have had one of those conversations, it's enabled a closer relationship, and that norming is happening now. And, you know, the performing, I think, is, yeah, we're a year in, and I think we're starting to kind of see that stage on the horizon.
Thank you.
Yeah,
go.
I'll just say that, look, I think a lot of that applies to us at the Cape as well. But I do notice that we've got some real genuine diversity of opinion at the Cape as well. And some folks who've come down the Cape are probably more cynical about, at first, about how well these homes can work. Is it really worthwhile? And it's really great when they see it and they are converted, that they do want to live at the Cape. And maybe their driving force could be more about saving money on their bills. Fuel bills as well as electricity bills. Obviously, there's no gas bills. That's, you know, houses are saving more than $5,000, you know, that electricity, gas, fuel, compared to a standard conventional home with an ICE vehicle as well. And we're okay with that. If that's their driving force, that's fine. But there is definitely a lot of folks who are very interested in the more social living, community living, and climate action, reducing their overall carbon footprint to as low as possible. And I think that's what Jodie said, summed up pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I could possibly just add a little bit to that, because I've just seen a few more questions pop up about sort of more collaborative, less ownership type models. And I know that's not necessarily your specialty, but I can say that I have travelled around the country and visited a lot of communities as part of my PhD. And I did learn, similar to what you just mentioned, Joe, that you know, there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen for people to move into a different type of community arrangement where there's often a lot of compromise. And even if you have your own strata and you own your own land, there's still compromise, and there's still ways that our upbringing in nuclear families has not necessarily trained us to be great at that kind of
absolutely,
negotiations. And that was one of the questions that I might lead to here, was about how to deal with differences and deal with decision making. How does that happen in your communities?
Well, I think from our research that we had done, governance is probably one of the biggest issues that that ends up causing the demise of fledgling eco-villages. I think that governance, the social governance, how do people make decisions, how do people from completely different walks of life come together and communicate effectively. I think Jodie mentioned before, the Witchcliffe Ecovillage developers offer a creating communities course that is run by an independent woman named Dr. Louise Duxbury. She's an expert in community facilitation, non-violent communication. Oh gosh, Jodie can probably speak to it a little better than me. I haven't actually done my course yet, but that's one of the things that we do to help, I guess, lay some good foundations for people to learn to listen to one another. I mean, it really comes down to the simple things and being open enough to understand that your view is not necessarily right. You've got to listen to everybody in a group, and how do you do that effectively? And it sounds really simple, but I don't think any of us are experts at that. And I think, doing some of these courses, and there's a follow-up one as well that residents can do, it just lays a really good groundwork for those conversations to be had. I think we've also got a whole lot of resources that we point people to in our residents' handbook. Jo, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that our clusters are only 19 to 25 people. So that's, in the scheme of things, I guess not a large, and in terms of how young our eco-village is, there's kind of 7 or 8 residents in my cluster. Some have got 15 already. And our particular cluster, because each strata cluster decides on their own governance. Some have definitely, decided to adopt consensus decision making. Others have got a vote system, and everybody has to, agree on what system they use. Our little cluster has kind of adopted the phrase "good enough for now, safe enough to try," and that's one of Louise Duxbury's. So we're just going to give something a go, and then if it doesn't work for someone, please put your hand up. And that's been, working pretty well from our perspective.
As Jodie said before, we're also a fairly young eco-village. We've only got, 60 residents? 55 residents, households at the moment. Eventually, when we're fully built out, we'll have about probably in the order of about 380 households. So we're still very much a nascent developer, but even that so far has created lots of storming, and we're getting towards norming, but lots of storming and forming happening at the moment for sure. So look, governance is the big issue about the successful failure of eco-village. That and financials really are probably the 2 big things as to whether or not eco-villages work or they don't.
And I think at the Cape, I really like good enough for now and safe enough to try. And we do.
It's a great phrase, isn't it?
It's a great phrase. Yeah, brilliant. So we have an OC in place, similar to folks might have in an apartment building, to manage all the common space. And there's a committee that has a lot of control with that, and then subcommittees who look at different areas. There's nature groups, there's committees for the community farm. So we've found that it's important to provide space, but the OC rules and what we have in the design guidelines for the Cape provides some guardrails as well. So I think it's a bit of both, where there's a lot of control with the community and the committee and the folks who want to be involved in the committee. I think we've been incredibly fortunate that we've got a great committee and have always had great folks on the committee. But it is also really key to make sure there's guardrails so that everybody has a really clear understanding of what's possible and what's in play and what's not. Yeah.
No, they're all really sound suggestions. And I would also add to that there are ways that people can learn some of these skills outside of the Ecovillage setting before they go into sort of co-living arrangement. There's online courses and there's various things that people can do if they're interested in learning about how to negotiate problem solving and communal decision making and those sort of things, which, yes, seem to be very common issues and also things that we probably do need to brush up on if we're going to think about eco-village living.
Renew is a non-profit membership organisation. Along with running Sustainable House Day, we also inform government policy, advocate for a fair energy transition, provide resources for climate disaster resilience, and publish 2 magazines. Sanctuary Magazine provides trusted independent information for people looking to build or renovate sustainably. Renew Magazine is a leading voice on sustainable technology developments shaping the energy transition. These magazines grew from member newsletters in the 1980s and still maintain their grassroots independence and practical approach. Both are incredible resources, and subscribing is a great way to support us to transform Australian homes for climate and energy resilience.
I might make this my last question because we are running out of time, and I want to thank Elena for speaking to my passion, which is about natural building. So are natural materials integrated into the design requirements for your eco-villages, or how many houses would be made out of natural materials?
Oh, absolutely. Our biggest material is timber frame, but we also do quite a lot of straw bale. Hempcrete has been wildly popular and growing, although it's starting to get a bit pricey at the moment. And we do a little bit of reverse brick veneer, but most of our homes are timber frame and timber clad. All of them have to be FSC certified timber. The hempcrete, I don't know whether listeners might not be familiar with hempcrete. Hempcrete is an amazing material. I'm actually building out of that myself and extremely excited. It's all natural. It's basically the herd of the inside of the marijuana sativa plant that is then essentially pulped and mixed with lime. So it is a natural breathable material. It's fire retardant. It's acoustically quiet. It's incredibly family efficient, get really high NatHERS ratings on it, and it actually petrifies over time, so it actually gets quite hard like concrete, it's quite an amazing material. Straw bales, we've probably got about, I guess, maybe somewhere between 8 to 10 straw bales already in the Ecovillage, and we're only just starting, and they're just beautiful buildings in terms of like they're gorgeous organic curves and nice deep window seats, and of course straw bale is probably the most thermally efficient of all materials I think that you could possibly get. So and of course they create such lovely unique looking homes. So yes, we don't steel framing. We have a really comprehensive set of building design guidelines that go through all of these materials. We have requirements for double glazing and a whole range of things. So rather than restrictive, we like to think of our design guidelines as basically being there to help people build the most sustainable home that they can.
That's great. And Clint?
Yeah, I think firstly that sounds amazing, Jo. I'd love to see a lot of those homes.
You should come on down, Clint, and have a look.
Yeah, look, it'll definitely happen one day. We have some natural materials at the Cape, they're all timber frame. We've got a lot of rammed earth in various parts around the estate, but our remit from the early days has been as a demonstration project. So we've really tried to mainstream sustainable housing using mainstream materials. And so we launched 10 years ago when the scene was quite different to what it is now. And there was a lot of stigma around sustainable homes. So part of what we're trying to achieve and still are trying to achieve is to have folks see sustainable housing, sustainable living, not as an impediment or not as something that is going to be cause problems or not be in line with the aesthetic thereafter necessarily. So we don't have too many requirements on the materials that they can and can't use. We have things like restrictions on external block work or bricks because of the basic passive sustainable design principles there. We do encourage a lot of recycled materials, and we definitely encourage natural materials, which we've seen a fair few of them. But yeah, at a high level, we say it's mainstream materials. You'll see a lot of at the Cape, and we'd like to think that folks who have come in and visited the Cape and had predisposition as to what an eco-village would look like are often a bit surprised when they go, I wasn't sure if I could be involved with necessarily an eco-village, but look at this. It seems, aside from having lots of open space and no front fences and a lot of different looking beautiful homes, they look by and large like any other home. So yeah, that's the angle we've come from.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we got in time for one more, but I would say that to that point, that's what Sustainable House Day is all about in terms of giving people a view to checking out the kinds of houses that are involved. And so both Witchcliffe and the Cape have houses, as I mentioned at the top of the panel, that you can check out on the website through today. And you can ask questions of people who have built those houses. So that would be, I think, the way that people can get an insight if they can't physically visit either of your spaces. That would be a good way for them to understand what it is that we're talking about and the kinds of houses that people do build when they live in eco-villages. So I want to say thank you.
I just add to that a little bit. Jodie's house, the Cubby house, was actually featured in Sanctuary magazine, your partner magazine to Renew, last edition. So yeah, we've got some beautiful photos of her home there.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the plug for Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a really interesting conversation, and I have been trying to monitor the chat, and I do acknowledge that there are aspects of co-living that we didn't discuss, and I think that we should take that on and maybe put on another session maybe next year and have different panelists so that we can speak to the different variations of communal eco-living, because I think there's a really good question there about sustainable renting and having options for renters as well, which we didn't actually get to, but I thank you everyone for your questions, and please stick around for the next session, which is about to start with Anna Cumming, our editor of Sanctuary, on building prefab and modular homes. And thank you everyone behind the scenes for all of your hard work in putting together these webinars. They have been really valuable. And please don't forget that we're running a month of online extension sessions starting next week, offering a deep dive into 8 key areas of sustainable design. You can check out the full program via the link that's been put into the chat. And we also encourage you, our viewers today, thank you for joining us in this conversation. We encourage you to make a donation. All of today's events are free, but if everyone who has attended donates just $10, it will go a long way to supporting Renew to help transform Australia's homes for climate and energy resilience. Thank you so much.